Thank you for coming to this talk. We're going to have a good discussion about composability in DeFi. I think we all can agree that composability is essential to DeFi. The whole idea of Lego bricks being stacked on top of each other to build, these crazy financial ecosystems that we see in crypto and in Solana. We've got margin trading, we've got aggregation, we've got layer twos, we've got mango markets as well. And so we're going to get the conversation started off really talking about the risks that are associated when we build these systems that layer on top of each other. When we build composable systems, we also expose ourselves to the risk of highly profitable trading strategies. And so, Max, I'm going to start it off with you, just to walk us through how you think about risk in DeFi. You obviously might have some more pertinent thoughts than the rest of the panel, but I think you're a good place to start, just to walk us through how protocols deal with the risks of locking together.
Yeah, I think the best part is that you can at least try it all out. I remember like step number one of like building Mango was like deploying Serum on DevNet, right? That was the first protocol we wanted to integrate with, and I think that's like the beauty of open source, that you can actually do that, right? If you want to build something that directly interacts with FTX, then you can't really like put it together and run like a million synthetic tests on it. So you're a bit limited in what you can do there. Right, this aspect is actually like, I would say, great plus. All processes are coded, right? So you can like simulate actually against them.
And Edgar, walk us through the different ways that MarginFi, all the composability aspects of how MarginFi works, and how you think about the risks that are associated across that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so composability is the very foundation of what MarginFi is, right? We build a DeFi native prime brokerage. We fundamentally don't ship our own markets. We integrate with other markets on what we call underlying trading protocols like Mango. And so for us, not only did we start with composability, but immediately we started with the risks that come with composability. I think about infrastructure risk primarily, right? If we're providing our users with access to Mango, then we are exposing our users to the infrastructure risk that comes with Mango, right, or with any third-party protocol, on top of the risks that come with our protocol. And so, for us, it's been a process of, heavily evaluating the integrations that we support, working closely with the teams behind the protocols to make sure that not only is there a high-quality product to start out with, but as development continues, right, that safety bar is maintained. But it is definitely a tough process and an ongoing evaluation.
Let's see. Ben, with Jupiter, how are you thinking about these issues and like the risks that are associated? Are we doing enough in DeFi to consider the risks that are associated when you bring these protocols together?
I don't think you can ever do enough in terms of securing or communicating the risks to users. Fortunately for DEX aggregation, the risks are pretty nominal. Since we compose on all the other DEXs. For the most part, users have amazing benefits because being able to route through multi-hop, trade split, all in a single transaction brings amazing price discovery, price savings for people who are swapping. I think for other composable use cases, there's another protocol that we also operate called Mercurial Finance. And one interesting thing we've done there is that we've connected up our lending aggregator to our stable pools. So in terms of, I would say, like innovating in order to bring more sustainable yield to the LPs to our stable pools, there is some increased risk. And I think the challenge there is trying to educate people on where this extra yield comes from and what is the extra sort of risk they're taking on when they take a position.
And Dima, you're building a layer 2 with layer N for the Solana ecosystem. You might be in a good position to walk us through how you think about composability across different chains, because there are infrastructural reasons why composability might work better on Solana than it does on Ethereum. How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I know that like the biggest fear around L2s is really like liquidity fragmentation when the liquidity just goes like to 10 different L2s. But for us, like liquidity is the most important thing, and also composability as well. So for that matter, like we are offering the best performance in all of DeFi, a lot of blockchain in general. Like so, we are actually matching FTX's throughput. So it is actually really alluring for people to come and bring their liquidity to us to not lose like money on AMMs or on-chain order books. That's one part of the problem. Another part is like obviously composability. And actually at launch, like we'll have like a protocol called UMI, and that protocol enables like universal margin interoperability. And that what it means is that whatever collateral you own will be cross-margin and cross-collateralized. So you can have like dozens of options protocols, and they'll have a foundation to enable cross-margining and cross-collateralization, and same comes for perps, for options protocol, etc. So essentially, we finally provide an infra for all of the devs, like to compose with protocols, instead of like everyone figuring out like how do I make a CPI call, how do I work with this team, and that team makes an update. So essentially, we hope that like within a year, like Layer N will become like the hub for all of the DeFi liquidity.
And when we're thinking about which Lego bricks we're calling upon, I think it's also incumbent upon us to consider the risks that they might not be as maintained as other projects. Like, for example, Serum is a project that a lot of people say is feature complete. It also is one that hasn't been updated in a substantial way in a bit of time. Are there responsibilities or requirements that we should have for an ecosystem when pieces of the puzzle that are as fundamental as something such as Serum, is the way it is? Not that there's anything wrong with how Serum works. It just is one certain way, and it doesn't really change much. Max, I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, I think the part that things don't change is actually good. I think it would be nice. I think the hardest part was when we had to change, right, the redemption process after the hack. We're like, okay, what we're going to do now? And then it was like, okay, how many protocols actually integrate? And I think we knew 10 or 14, something like in that range, but then there were a few more that we discovered in the process. I think you guys had like a lending aggregator or something that we didn't even know about. We were just like, oh, what is this account? And like, it was like kind of like surprising actually, but then the interesting part was that it was like a community effort, right? To figure out this change in like a very rapid pace. I think the program changes were like 3 days deployed, and the first people pulled out money in like, I think 24 hours even. There was a bit of back and forth and updating like everyone's program and like making the UI compatible with it, but I was very surprised. I think there's some teams who were so quick, like under 24 hours. It's like Investin, for instance, is really rapid. It shows you that like the people really take it seriously, right? And I remember when Serum did upgrade from V2 to V3, that was just, I think, like 3 days after the initial Mango release of V1, and that was like the worst thing that could happen to us. We were so mad at them. So I'd say in general, it's better if things don't change. Yeah? And like, it's very hard to orchestrate else.
And Ben, what happens from your perspective when things start to break? Specifically, like as Max was alluding to in the case of Mango.
Yeah, I think this is a good sign, by the way, that we're still in the early days of composability, because I mean, Max says it in a really nice way that it's a community effort, but it truly is. We're fortunate that we're connected to a lot of the people who are building the protocols that we compose on top of, and we have direct lines of communication. We can really collaborate in order to solve some of these issues so that downstream users or integrators or other people who are using our protocols don't feel the effects to their UIs or their products. And it's not well documented. Things are changing a lot, and there's a lot of negotiation and collaboration that needs to happen. And I think in some ways, it may, I would say, like, add friction to how composable we can, or how can we scale composability, right? But I mean, I really like working with all these guys, so it's also kind of like a fun thing.
And Edgar, I'll throw it to you. When we're thinking about how these pieces fit together, standardization is something that's really important.
Yeah.
In Web 2, we have all these different protocols that allow the internet to function. In crypto and Solana, it's still very much a developing, a moving target. There are standards that purport to be standards that might not be standards because there's another standard that does the same thing. So if there are two standards, there's not a standard.
Right.
How are we to evolve as an ecosystem such that there are certain rules of the road as to how things should function that we can, sure, iterate on, but that everyone follows?
Yeah. I mean, I would argue that that's not really a question about DeFi. It's a question about like society, right? I think we've, like as people, been struggling with the balance between a standard that creates cohesion, but ultimately takes opinions on how things should get done, and like the flexibility of being more inclusive and allowing different things. I think we see the same spectrum and the same trade-offs in DeFi, right? And all of blockchain development, for that matter. Anytime you have a standard, right, you're in some form constraining someone, right? And the beautiful thing about open source protocols, right, the beautiful thing about smart contract composability is that you can have a community effort that scales very quickly in a distributed way. People are building things on top of each other at speeds that you just couldn't do if that flexibility didn't exist, right? So then you kind of go through this journey of, all right, we start with a foundation, we incentivize growth, we have a lot of pieces, and then we say, okay, we've kind of reached saturation. There's enough players in the game, a standard now makes sense, because there's kind of social consensus, at least, on the way that things should be done, right? And now the challenge is, how do we get people to adopt the standard, especially because there's tech debt, right? Things have already been built. And I think it's tough. I think we, in DeFi, are at a point where there is definitely a need for certain standards. One of the reasons we're really excited about UMI, on layer N, but I do think we're going to continue to struggle with that balance between standardizing and keeping things inclusive and flexible.
And for layer N, and just generally, who should be making the decisions about what integrations are occurring? Like the composability is all about plugging in. Should that be a decision that's made by the token holders, by the core team? Where should the power lie in making these decisions?
Yeah, I think that depends like how well you design your token distribution. I think like the team who is building the protocol should have a lot of say in how it's designed and how it's built, especially initially at the very beginning. And that's why I think like once Yumi live, like I think there's like we want to incentivize developers to interact with this protocol as much as possible and build it together. And I think like it comes down like how do you distribute governance? And the goal is like essentially is that that people like, who will be using the protocol, who will be building on top of it, have a lot of say in it. And I think like incentivizing their governance participation on developer side and giving them right to vote is incredibly important. I think like the Serum is like working in that direction as well, like on the governance side, like how to get more protocols to participation, especially the ones who are integrating with Serum.
You mean with the treasury management? I mean the
Serum order book.
The order book, okay.
Yeah.
And Mango, I've always liked looking at the Mango governance pages because everything seems to be put up to a vote, whether whether it's a token listing or this or that. How have you navigated? How's Mango navigated that decision-making process in putting so much up to the community?
I think there's a lot of soft governance also. So like Jupiter and Mango only started working together because Swap is like a well-known individual in the community. He's not a builder himself, but he's like basically advising a lot of protocols and like trying to pull the connections. He just opened a Telegram group, and I think until today he's in that group for no apparent reason, but that's just who created that group, right? And he was like, hey, you should talk. And then from there, right, we started integrating more and more, and like version 4 will be like basically a nice, like it's essential that Jupiter is there and works well. And we couldn't build it without, similar to how previous versions of Mango wouldn't be able to be built without Serum. And right, this is always the idea, okay, there is certain things, they're so good, we don't need to like improve on them. And I think in governance decisions, sometimes it's just better have another team take care of the whole thing, right? And the same was, oh, we want to build our own DAO. There is no real DAO program yet on Solana. Some developer, Sebastian in Solana Labs, was working on something that was like compound style, good enough for us. And we said, okay, we're not going to build our own. We're going to work with that and just adopt that. And then I think fast forward, right? Like, I think like a few months later, people were like, oh no, but it's not written in Anchor, or it's not the right thing. We should rewrite this from scratch. And like, yeah, that's exactly the moment where it's like, okay, some people weren't adopting that standard, right? And now we have like a bunch of teams migrating from these like alternative governance implementations over back to Realms because it kind of prevailed as the standard. So I think sometimes it's easier to give up on these things and like be like, okay, but let's take something that is good and try to like improve it as much as we can. But then there's also this ego, right, to like do it outside. But I think everyone has an influence there, right? It's the developer with its decision to use the other protocol or to build its own. And sometimes it's the decision of the community to make the developers aware of, hey, there are alternatives out there, you shouldn't reinvent the wheel. And this is mutually beneficial for everyone on Solana, right?
And at your crypto, we pride ourselves on the new financial paradigms that we're developing. Is composability really that unique to DeFi, like in the financial world?
No, I mean, I don't think so. I think in the form that it exists in DeFi, right, it's new. But I mean, I haven't seen a financial system that is not composed, right, of many pieces. In TradFi, I think there are a lot more pieces, and so there's more fragmentation. That may be a factor of just how early DeFi is. But I think in a lot of ways, the composability component has existed in finance forever.
And so what, if anything, is crypto doing new when it comes to composability?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the new pieces come in the form that composability exists in DeFi, right? I think, key differences that I think about, one, a lot more automation, right? You have, in traditional finance, there's a lot of processes that are people-driven, right? In DeFi, things are software-driven. That can be good, that can be bad. I think it's net positive. I think it's an improvement. And then, I would say with respect to how different pieces develop, right, similar to, kind of the Serum Mango relationship, in DeFi, things are moving a lot faster on that front, right? Usually in finance, there's a lot more conversation, a lot more barriers, right? Now, again, I think it's a continued process of, all right, let's try to increase velocity of development and progress. Let's get to better solutions faster while having the right guardrails.
You saw me grabbing my bottle, and you stopped talking right there.
I'd cut you short. Yeah.
Cut me short, God damn it. But Ben, do we see with Solana relative to other chains, is there more composability, less composability? How do we measure? Should we measure different chains based on how easy it is for different pieces to come together?
Yeah.
And please give me some time to.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think everyone here believes that like composability is the true value of DeFi and blockchain. I do think that Solana is much more composable than a lot of the other chains, partly due to how cheap the gas fees are. So that really helps with being able to stack different protocols together. And it's one of the main reasons why we can aggregate so well, to be honest. And also the transaction speeds, right? Like I think one of the things that Solana is really great at, or a lot of the builders here are great at, is really focused on having dApps and experiences that are almost or approaching the user experience you might see on a TradFi or more centralized exchange, right? And you want these fast transactions, these fast the ability to trade as quickly as possible. And I mean, to me, this is the sort of one of the powerful things about Solana is that decentralized liquidity, decentralized exchanges, can actually create these experiences, right? That's been, I think, one of the main challenges.
And Deepa, talk to us about transaction speeds.
Yeah, I mean, as a rollup, obviously our goal is to increase Solana's throughput and latency. I think like what we don't really realize is that like TradFi processes millions of transactions a second, right? If you take Binance, for example, they claim to be able to transact like 1.4 million transactions a second, and even like when you take like the best day on Solana, it's like nowhere near there. And as a rollup, like we really want to come close to to TradFi as much as possible, because ultimately users want security, but they don't want to sacrifice performance. And so as a rollup, we really target like to remove that boundary between Web 2 and Web 3 and allow builders like on Solana to really use it and leverage it, like to build like true financial infrastructures that can be used in real world. And on another hand, it's not only about like how many transactions you can do a second, but also latency. I think like if you look at it, like every HFT firm like cares a ton about like how quickly they can finalize their transactions, how quickly they can hear response. And as a rollup, we aim to improve on that and match the latencies that you can see on FTX, for example, and even like probably improve it if we can do that. And so ultimately, as a rollup like ourselves, like we'll be able to match execution of any SEX or any other exchange like in TradFi world, and ultimately bring more people like to decentralized world.
And let's talk about language for a second. So there's composability. It's almost like a buzzword in crypto. Interoperability, also almost a buzzword. DeFi, it's its own animal entirely. But Edgar, what do these words actually mean? And what should they mean to the wider world? Because like you were saying, the financial world has composability. I've never heard of Morgan Stanley talking about how composable they are.
Yeah, you threw me the definition question because I got you with the water earlier.
Absolutely.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it makes sense. Okay, I mean, so for one, I think that terminology gets trendy, right? I think there's life cycles to trends, and a lot of words will mean the same things, right? I worked in AI before crypto. Like we see the same thing in AI, right? The same concepts are defined different ways. Different words are used. I think composability and interoperability are very closely related. I would say the difference between them, interoperability speaking to how systems work together, composability more focused on how systems are built together. And the difference there, right, composability I think is forward-looking, it's community-oriented, it touches on the people processes, right, that factor into development, the collaboration, the partnerships, right? Interoperability is the observed state, right? How do things work after they are composed?
So
I'd like to add, do you
Yes,
mind if I add? So I think actually part of why, I mean, because I think you're right, like in TradFi and DeFi, they both are composable. But I think the thing that excites people about composability is also sort of the permissionless nature of DeFi, right? And the fact that you don't have to go through lots of approvals, trying to work with, or even sign legal agreements. And there's all these barriers, right? So I think the hope, the vision of composability and permissionless is that maybe there's thousands or maybe eventually millions of builders who can just find new, innovative, interesting ways to combine things that aren't necessarily things that big companies might think about or what other people might think about. And I hope to see a lot more interesting, projects being built, right? And I think that's what I think everyone is maybe excited to see.
And
Yeah, I agree with that actually. I mean, this is sometimes the part, right, where you don't even know.
Yeah.
And I mean, and you can't really stop them. Like, I think UXD was one of those projects. It was like very eager to build something, and that would never be impossible. I think then originally they wanted to build it on Bybit. Like the idea existed for a while, but it was clear they would get shut down. So they were like, okay, we need to find derivatives exchange is not going to kick us out. Like, yeah, it's just like, right, it's like these things, you could do that in theory, but at a certain size and scale, it would become an issue, and people would question that, and you would be, because you cannot guarantee that this is going to continue operating, right?
Yeah.
That's also the part where I was like, really like, yeah, I would say scared from the precedent Solent set with their decision to be like, hey, okay, we made a mistake. Now we need to like get this position out of the exchange. You're gonna like forcefully liquidate it. Right? I think if that wouldn't have been an individual but another protocol, there would have been like way more conflicted decision, right? Because then it goes against the principle of composability. Then it's not just like a reckless individual, but then it's like a whole another community and of people and like people that believe in a certain project, right?
Great. Well, thank you all for your input. Composability is something that will continue to be composed in DeFi. Let's get the fuck out of here. All right. Thank you all.